In an era where power is often mistaken for greatness, one young man, a quiet figure, rarely seen, left a legacy that would transcend time and space. Barron Trump's unexpected act of humility during his father's inauguration ignited a global movement that forever redefined leadership. It wasn't his name, his family, or his wealth that made him unforgettable. It was his message. Lead with your heart, and the world will follow. His journey from a reserved young man to a force of compassion, empathy, and service would shape the world's future and even reach beyond Earth itself. This is the story of Barron Trump, an unexpected leader who changed the world without ever seeking the spotlight. What if his story wasn't just about one person, but about the future of humanity? They say that some moments become history without anyone ever seeing them coming. For Barron Trump, the famously reserved youngest son of one of the most controversial presidents in history, that unforgettable moment came at his father's inauguration, an event watched by hundreds of millions worldwide. Yet what happened on that January day wasn't scripted, it wasn't anticipated, and it certainly wasn't planned by any member of Trump's campaign team. Instead, it was a single, spontaneous act, so shocking, so deeply authentic, that it left everyone watching speechless. This isn't just a story about Barron Trump stealing the spotlight at one of the most historic presidential inaugurations in American history. It's a story about character, humility, compassion, and the extraordinary courage it takes to stand apart from the expectations of a watching world. It's a story that proves the true measure of a leader isn't found merely in his name or lineage, but in the sincerity of his actions and the depth of his humanity, especially when no one expects it. January 20th dawned crisp and cold in Washington, D.C., a thin layer of frost glistening on Pennsylvania Avenue as crowds gathered by the tens of thousands. This was no ordinary inauguration. It was Donald Trump's unprecedented return to the presidency, a moment destined for history books. Streets filled early with excited crowds, supporters eager to witness the rebirth of a political movement that had captured the nation's imagination. At the center of it all stood the Trump family, America's most closely watched political dynasty. All eyes were naturally fixed on Donald Trump, the man of the hour, and his wife Melania. Cameras flashed ceaselessly, capturing their every gesture, every expression. Yet in that moment, few noticed Barron Trump, standing quietly, calmly, slightly apart from the frenetic energy surrounding his family. At 18 years old, Barron had grown notably tall, towering even above his famous father. But despite his height and his presence, Barron had always been known for his reserved demeanor, quietly keeping himself away from the harsh glare of media scrutiny. But today would be different. Today, everyone would see a side of Barron Trump they never expected and never imagined. Few could truly grasp the immense pressure that came with being Barron Trump. Born into extraordinary privilege, yes, but equally into an unrelenting spotlight. Scrutinized endlessly from the moment he first appeared publicly as a small child, eyes wide and confused, during his father's first presidential run. His childhood had been carefully guarded by Melania, determined to shield him from excessive media attention. But no one could fully shield Barron from the whispers, the speculative headlines, or the constant pressure of public expectation. Barron Trump grew up differently than his peers, forced to mature quickly under intense public scrutiny. And yet, through it all, he maintained a quiet dignity, rarely speaking publicly, seldom seeking attention, never allowing the weight of expectation to define him. Until now. As Donald Trump ascended the podium, ready to deliver his second inaugural address, an air of anticipation settled over the vast crowd. His speech was vintage Trump, forceful, provocative, uncompromisingly confident. He spoke passionately of patriotism, unity, and the importance of listening to a new generation. And then, unexpectedly, Donald Trump paused. He turned, smiled knowingly, and looked directly at his youngest son, Barron. The cameras followed Trump's gaze, capturing the moment in perfect clarity. "You know, we won the youth vote by 36 points," Trump began warmly, nodding toward Barron. "And that wasn't because of my team. It was because of this young man here, my son, Barron." The crowd murmured in surprise, turning their collective attention to Barron. Millions watching at home leaned in, captivated by this unexpected focus on the famously private Trump son. "Barron understood young Americans deeply," Trump continued sincerely. "He said to me, 'Dad, you have to speak to them, not at them. Listen, don't just lecture.' And because I listened to him, today we stand here stronger." Applause broke out gently at first, then swelling powerfully. Barron remained quietly poised, calmly respectful, yet clearly surprised by the attention suddenly upon him. His face registered quiet humility, dignity, but also discomfort at being the sudden center of millions of eyes. As Donald Trump resumed his speech, attention gradually shifted back toward him. But Barron, standing silently behind, felt deeply moved, not merely by his father's public praise, but by the genuine responsibility he felt toward young Americans, toward those his father now led. As Trump continued speaking, a quiet commotion arose near the stage. A young girl, no older than 10, had somehow slipped through the barriers, her small frame dwarfed by the towering Secret Service agents who quickly intercepted her approach toward the inauguration podium. Barron immediately noticed. Something in him shifted powerfully, profoundly. He saw clearly the girl's eyes, frightened, uncertain. She was obviously overwhelmed, intimidated, realizing only now the scale of what she'd done. Instinctively, Barron moved forward swiftly, ignoring protocol, ignoring the startled looks of Secret Service agents, to kneel gently beside her. "What's your name?" Barron asked softly, gently reassuring. "Emma," she whispered nervously. I wanted to give your dad this." She held out a small handwritten note, trembling. Barron smiled warmly, taking the note respectfully. "I'll make sure he gets it personally," he promised sincerely. Barron stood carefully, gently holding Emma's hand, guiding her safely back to her anxious parents nearby, who apologized profusely. But Barron simply smiled warmly, genuinely reassuring. No apology needed. Emma reminded everyone clearly today what matters most, not titles, not speeches, but genuine connection. And then something truly extraordinary happened. The cameras, the crowds, everyone had stopped watching Trump's speech entirely, instead transfixed deeply, emotionally, by Barron's quiet act of authentic kindness and courage. When Barron returned calmly to the stage, something had profoundly shifted. His father paused briefly, deeply moved himself. Donald Trump nodded warmly, clearly proud. "Today," Trump said warmly, voice emotional, "my son just reminded us powerfully that the greatest leadership is found clearly in humility, courage, and authentic empathy, not mere authority." The audience rose spontaneously, profoundly moved, applauding deeply, sincerely, emotion rippling clearly through millions watching nationwide. Instantly, social media exploded profoundly with footage of Barron's deeply authentic act, going viral nationwide within moments. People across America, regardless of political affiliation, recognized clearly the profound sincerity of Barron's spontaneous, compassionate gesture. Headlines nationwide declared clearly, emotionally, Barron Trump's genuine moment overshadows inauguration speech. Barron Trump's sincere humility shocks America. Barron Trump shows us what leadership truly means. Political commentators praised profoundly his authenticity, empathy, and courage. Media outlets highlighted clearly the profound humility and genuine character Barron had quietly displayed. And overnight, Barron Trump became more than merely the president's son. He became a profound symbol, clearly reminding America authentically that true leadership was humility, empathy, and courageous sincerity. The powerful moment Barron Trump shared with Emma during his father's second inauguration quickly became an iconic image in American history. Overnight, it sparked profound national reflection, not simply because of the act itself, but because of the authenticity and humility with which Barron carried it out. Across America, families gathered around televisions replaying the heartfelt footage. In coffee shops, schools, and workplaces, conversations shifted from political divisions toward genuine discussions about kindness, humility, and what leadership truly meant. Barron's spontaneous moment of compassion had resonated powerfully, precisely because it was authentic, unscripted, and deeply sincere, qualities the public rarely witnessed clearly from politicians or public figures anymore. His quiet humility, genuine sincerity, and authentic courage had created something profoundly meaningful, a genuine reminder clearly of humanity itself. In the days following the inauguration, curiosity grew intensely about Emma, the young girl whose simple act of delivering a letter had sparked such a powerful national moment. Days later, with her family's permission, Emma's letter was shared publicly, deeply moving millions across America with its profound simplicity and sincerity. Dear Mr. President Trump, my dad lost his job. Mom said things are tough right now for many people, but I believe in you. I hope you can help everyone, even people who didn't vote for you. Please remember us. Love, Emma. The heartfelt innocence within Emma's simple words profoundly touched America. Her genuine concern, untainted by political division or cynicism, clearly reminded millions of Americans profoundly what truly mattered: empathy, unity, humility, and authentic compassion. Barron personally ensured his father read Emma's note quietly in the Oval Office. Donald Trump himself was deeply moved. He later spoke sincerely about it in a nationally televised address. Emma's letter reminded me profoundly of why I'm here. Not simply to lead those who voted for me, but to truly help every single American. Sometimes we need humility clearly taught by a child to remember that leadership demands authentic compassion. Barron watched the address privately, deeply moved, understanding clearly that his small act had profoundly reshaped not just public opinion, but perhaps his father's presidency itself. In the quiet aftermath of these powerful events, Barron Trump found himself reflecting deeply, profoundly. Privately, he wrestled with the unexpected attention his act had created, but he also clearly recognized its profound potential. In a rare personal reflection shared privately with a close family friend, Barron explained clearly, authentically, I didn't plan to act publicly that day. But when I saw Emma's sincere courage, her willingness to approach me despite fear, I understood profoundly that leadership isn't about speeches, fame, or power. It's about authentic empathy. It's about never forgetting clearly the genuine humanity in every person around us. Barron's powerful reflections, shared anonymously yet later revealed publicly, touched millions, profoundly reinforcing clearly how deeply sincere his act had truly been. Barron's sincere, heartfelt gesture resonated deeply, quietly transforming national conversations, schools, homes, community forums, all profoundly engaging with the simple yet powerful message clearly embodied authentically in his humble action. Teachers nationwide began discussing Barron's act sincerely in classrooms, profoundly teaching students clearly that authentic leadership wasn't about fame or power, but empathy, humility, and genuine sincerity. Privately, Donald Trump himself continually reflected deeply on Barron's genuine example, often quietly sharing with advisors how profoundly moved he'd been clearly by his son's spontaneous act. Barron taught me clearly in that single moment what decades in politics had failed to show me authentically. Genuine humility is our most powerful leadership tool. Although he remained publicly reserved, privately Barron continued profoundly influencing his father's administration authentically, often gently reminding President Trump clearly of the humility, empathy, and authenticity necessary to lead genuinely. Privately, Trump often reflected thoughtfully, profoundly grateful for Barron's authentic example clearly. My son taught me authentically that true leadership isn't authority. It's humility clearly demonstrated profoundly. I never imagined clearly how powerfully one small act could reshape everything. Barron himself avoided public praise, yet felt deeply fulfilled clearly, knowing profoundly his private humility had sparked genuine national transformation, reminding America authentically of empathy's quiet yet profound power clearly. Over decades, historians would remember Barron Trump authentically, not simply as a president's son, but profoundly as a quiet, sincere hero, clearly embodying genuine courage, humility, and authentic empathy powerfully. His simple moment with Emma became historical legend, a profound example clearly teaching generations authentically about humanity, empathy, humility, and genuine courage, powerfully hidden quietly within everyone. As decades turned into generations, the profound impact of Barron Trump's seemingly small yet remarkably powerful gesture continued resonating throughout American culture, politics, and public consciousness. That quiet moment when Barron stepped away from the scripted inauguration and toward the sincere innocence of a young girl named Emma became more than history. It became a timeless symbol of authentic humanity, humility, and genuine courage. Long after that historic inauguration day, American schools, communities, and even political institutions quietly commemorated the event. Classrooms from New York City to rural Montana included it in textbooks as a compelling example of the transformative power of humility and sincere compassion. Teachers discussed it earnestly, inspiring generations of students clearly with a simple lesson. Never underestimate the profound power hidden within genuine empathy. Leadership isn't defined by strength or status. It's defined clearly by authenticity, humility, and genuine respect. While Barron intentionally kept himself removed from the spotlight, dedicating himself privately and profoundly to charitable efforts away from public scrutiny, his quiet, humble influence shaped America's social and political fabric deeply. His father's administration, often known for confrontation and division, noticeably shifted in tone after that inauguration, becoming more open, reflective, and authentically compassionate. Privately, Barron continued guiding his father gently yet powerfully, subtly reminding him clearly that real strength rested not in forceful rhetoric, but in authentic empathy, humility, and genuine respect for others. Even the harshest critics of President Trump's political style acknowledged that something had changed profoundly after that moment with Emma. Years later, at the close of Donald Trump's second term, he chose an unprecedented move clearly illustrating his profound appreciation for Barron's lasting impact. In his final presidential address to the nation, he specifically honored his son's humble example before millions watching nationwide. "My fellow Americans, I've held the highest office twice, yet my greatest lessons didn't come from advisors or cabinet meetings. They came from my son, Barron, whose quiet courage and sincere empathy reminded me clearly of the power hidden profoundly within humility." On that inauguration day, Barron's genuine kindness reminded America authentically what leadership demands clearly: empathy, humility, and authenticity. Thank you, Barron. America is better because of you. Millions watching felt profoundly emotional, deeply moved by the president's rare humility and sincere reflection, clearly inspired authentically by Barron's genuine example. Yet Barron himself chose a profoundly different path. Rather than stepping fully into the political spotlight, he deliberately retreated quietly from public view, preferring instead an authentic life dedicated profoundly to quiet humanitarian work. He founded charitable organizations deeply committed to empowering underprivileged children, providing education opportunities, scholarships, and compassionate support authentically, never seeking public acknowledgement, always humbly serving clearly behind the scenes. Occasionally, Barron accepted quiet invitations to speak thoughtfully at leadership conferences or youth forums. His speeches, carefully chosen and deeply reflective, always emphasized clearly the same profound values: humility, empathy, courage, and authenticity. During one powerful speech at a national youth summit, Barron spoke sincerely to thousands of young leaders listening deeply. True leadership demands clearly not loud declarations, but authentic empathy, profound humility, and genuine respect. The most transformative moments in life are often quiet, subtle choices: to help someone else when no one is watching, to speak truth humbly rather than loudly, and to remember always clearly that authentic compassion profoundly changes lives. Young leaders listened intently, absorbing Barron's authentic wisdom profoundly, clearly inspired deeply by his humble yet powerfully genuine example. Inspired profoundly by the young girl whose simple courage had profoundly changed his life, Barron quietly established the Emma Foundation, a non-profit organization authentically devoted clearly to supporting underprivileged children nationwide. The foundation profoundly transformed countless lives authentically, clearly embodying Barron's sincere values: empathy, humility, courage, and genuine authenticity. Emma herself, now grown, became a respected leader within the foundation, profoundly humbled clearly by the incredible legacy sparked profoundly by her simple act of courage. Years later, at a special anniversary ceremony honoring the foundation's achievements, Emma stood quietly beside Barron, reflecting thoughtfully. "I never imagined clearly that handing Barron Trump a simple letter would profoundly inspire something so powerful. Barron's humility, compassion, and authentic courage taught me, and America clearly, that every voice, no matter how small or quiet, profoundly matters authentically. His quiet courage inspired millions clearly, and I'm forever grateful authentically that he chose empathy clearly, profoundly shaping countless lives through genuine humility." Barron stood humbly nearby, clearly moved deeply by Emma's sincere reflection, profoundly grateful authentically for the powerful legacy quietly hidden within a single compassionate moment decades earlier. Late in his life, Barron sat quietly, gently reflecting in his personal journal, profoundly grateful authentically for the remarkable journey clearly shaped by humility, courage, and genuine compassion. "When Emma approached me at my father's inauguration, my entire life profoundly shifted, not simply because I chose compassion, but because I saw clearly what leadership genuinely required: humility, empathy, and authentic sincerity. Tonight, I understand profoundly that leadership isn't speeches, applause, or power clearly. It's authentic humility, quietly demonstrated profoundly each day." He exhaled gently, profoundly grateful authentically for every quiet moment clearly spent courageously inspiring others deeply to embrace authentic humility, genuine respect, and profound courage clearly hidden within their hearts. When Barron passed away quietly years later, America paused profoundly, genuinely recognizing authentically a life clearly spent powerfully teaching humility, compassion, and authenticity. Thousands attended his funeral respectfully, deeply grateful profoundly for a life authentically lived, clearly, powerfully inspiring generations profoundly to choose humility, empathy, and courageous authenticity. At his memorial, former President Trump spoke profoundly, emotionally honoring Barron's lasting influence clearly. "Barron was my son, but he taught me profoundly more clearly than I ever taught him. He taught America powerfully that courage belongs authentically to those who choose humility over pride, empathy over division, and authenticity clearly over convenience. His legacy isn't merely political, it's profoundly human." The audience listened quietly, deeply moved, profoundly inspired clearly by Barron's authentic humility, respectful courage, and profound dignity. Barron Trump's legacy endured authentically, not simply in monuments, memorials, or history books, but profoundly in millions of lives, clearly inspired authentically by his courageous humility and genuine compassion, profoundly demonstrated in a single extraordinary moment, clearly remembered forever. His story never faded, continually inspiring profoundly, clearly teaching every new generation authentically that true courage, humility, and genuine empathy held profound power, clearly capable of transforming lives, reshaping societies, and inspiring humanity authentically forever. Barron Trump's authentic courage lived profoundly, continually resonating powerfully in every heart, genuinely inspired deeply by his extraordinary humility, compassion, and authenticity. His legacy endured authentically, profoundly clear, forever inspiring powerfully through simple yet timeless humility and courageous authenticity. In the decades following Barron Trump's powerful moment at his father's inauguration, generations of young Americans continued profoundly drawing inspiration from his quiet yet profound example of humility, empathy, and genuine courage. His actions had not merely shifted a national conversation, they had sparked a deep, sustained cultural shift in what people expected authentically from leadership. Schools nationwide continually celebrated Barron's legacy clearly, integrating lessons about humility, dignity, empathy, and compassion deeply within curricula. Students studied thoughtfully how Barron had quietly and powerfully demonstrated true leadership, understanding clearly that authentic strength was rooted profoundly in sincere humility and empathy. Each year, schools nationwide hosted a day dedicated profoundly to Barron's principles, clearly reminding students powerfully of authentic values, profoundly embodied within his life. Barron's principles: courage through humility. 1. Authentic leadership demands sincere empathy, humility, and genuine respect clearly given to every voice. 2. True strength is humility to listen authentically, speak clearly, and genuinely respect everyone profoundly, especially when difficult. 3. Never underestimate your quiet voice clearly. Genuine leadership often happens profoundly through simple acts of compassion, humility, and sincere empathy. These principles profoundly influenced generations, genuinely reshaping how youth saw leadership clearly. After the historic inauguration that placed him in the national spotlight, Barron Trump spent the following years living with a renewed sense of purpose. The world had seen a different side of him, one that many had not expected. He had grown up as a quiet figure in one of the most watched families in history, but his defining moment at the inauguration proved something undeniable. He was not merely the son of a former president, he was a leader in his own right. Despite the growing attention on him, Barron maintained his well-known humility. He did not rush into politics or the business world. Instead, he focused on his education, pursuing international relations and humanitarian studies at Georgetown University. He preferred to keep a low profile, often declining interviews and media appearances. But no matter how much he tried to stay away from the public eye, the world had not forgotten what they had witnessed during his father's inauguration. Even as a student, Barron remained deeply involved in community efforts. He frequently volunteered at shelters and worked with youth organizations that provided opportunities for underprivileged children. His presence, even without fanfare, continued to inspire many. His philosophy was simple yet powerful. Leadership isn't about standing in front of a crowd. It's about standing beside those who need a voice. His quiet actions spoke volumes. Years later, after finishing his studies, Barron Trump received a personal call that would change everything once again. This time, it wasn't his father on the other end of the line. It was the sitting President of the United States, extending a formal invitation to meet in the Oval Office. When Barron arrived at the White House, he was greeted with warm respect. The president, recognizing Barron's quiet influence, offered him an opportunity few could have imagined: to serve as a special advisor on youth and humanitarian affairs. Barron was humbled by the offer, but hesitant. He had never sought political power or recognition. He asked for time to consider. For him, Service was not about prestige, it was about purpose. That night, he reflected on his journey. He thought about the girl named Emma, the letter she had written, and the impact that one moment had left on him. He remembered the way his father had looked at him with pride after that spontaneous act of kindness. He knew what he had to do. A week later, Barron accepted the offer, but under one condition. He did not want a title or a salary. He simply wanted to be a voice for those who often went unheard. Barron's advisory role quickly became one of the most influential in the administration. While others sought political gain, Barron focused solely on action. His initiatives were simple, yet profoundly effective. The Emma Project. Named after the young girl who had changed his life, this initiative focused on providing mentorship programs for underprivileged youth, ensuring every child had access to education, career opportunities, and leadership development. Youth Leadership Forums. Barron regularly hosted open discussions with students across the country, ensuring that young Americans had a direct voice in shaping policies that affected them. The Civility Pact. Understanding the deep divisions in the country, Barron worked tirelessly to promote civil discussions in schools, advocating for respectful political discourse among students from different backgrounds. Despite his lack of a formal title, Barron's influence was undeniable. Unlike traditional politicians, he spoke to the people, not at them. His honesty and quiet wisdom made him respected across the political spectrum. Midway through his tenure as an advisor, America faced an unexpected humanitarian crisis. A series of devastating hurricanes struck multiple states, leaving thousands displaced. As the country scrambled to provide relief, Barron knew he couldn't just sit behind a desk and draft policies. He had to be there, on the ground, with the people. Without announcing his arrival, Barron personally traveled to one of the hardest-hit areas, rolling up his sleeves and working alongside volunteers at relief centers. For weeks, he helped distribute supplies, comforted families, and listened to their stories. Cameras captured footage of him standing in floodwaters, helping an elderly couple salvage their belongings. He didn't do it for attention. He did it because he believed in action over words. His presence didn't go unnoticed. National media outlets praised his genuine commitment, and social media was flooded with messages of admiration. Barron Trump isn't just talking about helping people. He's out there, doing it. This is the kind of leadership America needs: selfless, compassionate, real. Even the most cynical critics had to acknowledge that Barron was proving himself to be more than just a name. He was becoming a symbol of what leadership should look like. At a later rally, Donald Trump, now retired from politics, took the stage before thousands of his supporters. But this time, his speech wasn't about himself. It was about Barron. "You know, I've had a lot of victories in my life, but nothing makes me prouder than seeing what Barron has done. He never wanted the spotlight, but somehow the spotlight finds him. And every time, he uses it not for himself, but for others." The crowd erupted in applause. He's reminded me of something important, that real leadership isn't about power, it's about service. And that's what makes Barron different. Those words meant more to Barron than any title ever could. Barron's work continued for years. He remained a humble servant to the people, never seeking recognition, but always creating real change. He turned down offers to run for office multiple times, believing he could do more outside the confines of politics. But history had a different plan. Decades later, as a new generation emerged, young Americans looked back on the defining figures who had shaped their world. Among them, Barron Trump stood out, not because of politics, but because of his unwavering commitment to humanity. A professor at a prestigious university once described him as the leader America didn't expect, but the one it desperately needed. At the National Museum of American History, a permanent exhibit was dedicated to his contributions. And at the entrance, one quote was etched in stone, expecting anything in return. "Never forget the power of small acts. Never underestimate the impact of kindness. And never, ever believe that your voice doesn't matter. Lead with your heart, and the world will follow. Barron Trump. Do what is right, even when no one is watching. That is leadership. Barron Trump. Barron had never sought to leave a legacy, but he did. When Barron Trump passed away peacefully at an old age, the nation mourned the loss of one of its most remarkable figures. He had never been president. He had never sought power, but his legacy had shaped America in a way few leaders in the world would never forget. In his later years, Barron took to writing, reflecting on his life's journey. His final public letter, published in newspapers across the nation, was addressed not to politicians, but to the young leaders of tomorrow, as ever could. At his memorial, thousands gathered, not out of duty, but out of gratitude. A single flower was placed at his monument by an elderly woman. She had once been a little girl, holding a letter at an inauguration. To the next generation, the world will always tell you that leadership is about power, wealth, or influence. But I have learned that true leadership is about none of those things. It is about kindness, humility. The card attached to the flower had only 3 words. Thank you, Barron. And with that, his story lived on. Because true leadership is timeless, and Barron Trump's legacy will forever remind the world what it truly means to lead, and the courage to stand for what is right. The greatest leaders I have met weren't presidents or billionaires. They were teachers who inspired, nurses who comforted, and everyday people who chose to make someone's life better. Though Barron Trump had initially focused his work within the United States, his influence soon reached far beyond national borders. His message of humility and service resonated globally, and world leaders took notice. He was invited to speak at the United Nations Youth Leadership Summit, where, without expecting, he addressed anything to representatives from in return. Over 109 forget the power of small nations. Acts. Standing never under at the podium with the estimate the impact worldwide of kindness. Barron's and message never ever believe was simple that your voice, but profound, doesn't matter. Lead with your heart, and the world will follow. Barron Trump. Real leadership is not about ruling over people. It's about serving them. It's about standing up for those who don't have a voice and lifting up those who have been left behind. Whether you're from New York or Nairobi, when Barron Trump passed away peacefully at an old age, the nation mourned the loss of one of its most remarkable figures. He had never been president. He had never sought power. But his legacy had shaped America in a whether you're a leader of a country or a leader in your own home, we all have the same responsibility to make the world better than we found it. His speech was met with thunderous applause, and political analysts called way few leaders ever could. At his memorial, thousands gathered, not out of duty, but out of gratitude. A single flower was placed at his monument by an elderly woman. She had once been a little girl, holding a letter at an inauguration, one of the most inspiring addresses ever given at the UN. Unlike politicians who used carefully scripted words, Barron spoke from the heart. His sincerity was undeniable. Following the summit, Barron was asked to join the global The card attached to the flower had only 3 words. Thank you, Barron. And with that, his story lived on. Because true leadership is timeless, and Barron Trump's legacy will forever remind the world what it truly means. Humanitarian Initiative, an international coalition focused on eradicating child hunger, increasing access to education, and improving mental health awareness among youth. Despite his influence, he insisted on track to lead. Though Barron Trump had initially focused his work within the United States, his influence soon reached far beyond national borders. His message of humility and service resonated globally, and world leaders took notice, traveling to the most vulnerable regions, not as a celebrity or politician, but as a servant. Photos of Barron sitting cross-legged on the ground with children in war-torn villages, helping distribute food, and speaking directly. He was invited to speak at the United Nations Youth Leadership Summit, where he addressed representatives from over 190 nations. Standing at the podium, with the world watching, Barron's message was simple, but profoundly with struggling families circulated worldwide. But he never did it for the cameras. The cameras will leave, the headlines will fade, but the people we help, their lives are forever changed. And that's what matters, he found. Real leadership is not about ruling over people. It's about serving them. It's about standing up for those who don't have a voice and lifting up those who have been left behind. Whether you're from New York or Nairobi, once said in an interview. His humanitarian efforts earned him nominations for the Nobel Peace Prize multiple times, but each time he declined to campaign for it. He believed the work was its own reward. If we focus on awards, whether you're a leader of a country or a leader in your own home, we all have the same responsibility, to make the world better than we found it. His speech was met with thunderous applause, and political analysts. We lose sight of why we started in the first place, he told a reporter. Recognition is fleeting. Impact is permanent. Throughout his life, Barron maintained a deep, unwavering respect for his parents. Though the world called it one of the most inspiring addresses ever given at the UN. Unlike politicians who used carefully scripted words, Barron spoke from the heart. His sincerity was undeniable. Following the summit, Barron was asked to join. The world often tried to compare him to his father. He never sought to replace or outshine him. His relationship with Donald Trump evolved over time. In the early years, many expected Barron to follow directly in his father's footsteps in the Global Humanitarian Initiative, an international coalition focused on eradicating child hunger, increasing access to education, and improving mental health awareness among youth. Despite his influence, he insisted on stepping into the world of business or politics. But Barron chose a different path, one that emphasized service over power. Yet, in private moments, Donald Trump often told close friends how deeply proud he was of his son, traveling to the most vulnerable regions, not as a celebrity or politician, but as a servant. Photos of Barron sitting cross-legged on the ground with children in war-torn villages, helping distribute food and speaking directly with struggling families circulated worldwide. But he never did it for the cameras. The cameras will leave. The headlines will fade. But the people we help, their lives are forever changed. And that's what matters, he once said in an interview. His humanitarian efforts earned him nominations for the Nobel Peace Prize multiple times, but each time he declined to campaign for it. He believed the work was its own reward. If we focus on awards, we lose sight of why we started in the first place, he told a reporter. Recognition is fleeting. Impact is permanent. Throughout his life, Barron maintained a deep, unwavering respect for his parents. Though the world often tried to compare him to his father, he never sought to replace or outshine him. His relationship with Donald Trump evolved over time. In the early years, many expected Barron to follow directly in his father's footsteps, stepping into the world of business or politics. But Barron chose a different path, one that emphasized service over power. Yet, in private moments, Donald Trump often told close friends how deeply proud he was of his son. Barron didn't take the easy road. He could have had anything: money, power, a guaranteed career in politics. But he walked away from all of that because he wanted to build something real. That takes more guts than I ever had. Barron's bond with his mother, Melania, was just as strong. She had always been his protector, ensuring his childhood remained as normal as possible. Even as an adult, Barron credited her for shaping his character. My mother taught me that dignity is not about how others see you, it's about how you see yourself, and that no matter what the world says, you should always carry yourself with grace. When Melania grew older and needed more care, Barron personally ensured that she had the best medical support. Even with his global responsibilities, he made time to be by her side, holding her hand just as she had held his when he was a child. The greatest honor of my life wasn't receiving awards or speaking to world leaders, Barron later reflected. It was being there for my mother when she needed me the most. As the years passed, the Emma Foundation grew beyond what anyone had expected. What had started as a simple initiative inspired by a child's letter at an inauguration became one of the largest humanitarian organizations in the world. Under Barron's leadership, the foundation built over 500 schools in underserved communities, established mental health programs for at-risk youth, and funded millions of scholarships for children who otherwise would never have had a chance at an education. Emma, the little girl who had unknowingly started it all, remained deeply involved. In an emotional speech at the foundation's 25th anniversary, she reflected on how much had changed. "When I was 10 years old, I was just a kid with a letter. I never imagined that Barron Trump would not only read it but use it to change the world. He never sought power. He never needed to be in the spotlight. But his kindness, his ability to see people, really see them, that's what made him different." Tears filled the audience's eyes as she ended her speech with the same words she had once written in that letter so long ago. "Please remember us." And Barron had. As Barron Trump aged, he remained active in humanitarian work, but he intentionally withdrew from public life. He had spent decades in the service of others, and now he wanted to reflect. One evening, as he sat by the ocean, he took out his journal, something he had kept for years but never shared publicly. He flipped through its pages, reading his own words written across decades. He found an entry from the day after his father's second inauguration. "I never thought a moment could change my life so much. I didn't plan for any of it. I didn't expect it. But maybe the best things in life happen that way. Maybe real leadership isn't about planning every step. It's about being willing to take the first one." He smiled, remembering that younger version of himself. He had no idea then how far that first step would take him. In his final journal entry, written years later, he left behind his last piece of wisdom. "History doesn't remember the loudest voices. It remembers the ones that made a difference. If I've learned anything in my life, it's this: be kind, be humble, do what is right, even when no one is watching. That is how you change the world." With that, Barron closed his journal for the last time. When Barron Trump passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 98, the world mourned the loss of a man who had never sought fame but had earned the respect of millions. His funeral was attended by presidents, world leaders, humanitarians, and most importantly, ordinary people whose lives had been touched by his kindness. The service was simple, just as he would have wanted. As the ceremony came to a close, a young girl, no older than Emma had once been, walked up to his memorial and placed a handwritten note. It read, "Because of you, I know kindness still matters. Because of you, I believe in the good in people." That was Barron's legacy. Not wealth, not power, but kindness. Years after his passing, a permanent exhibit was created in Washington, D.C., titled "The Quiet Leader: The Life and Legacy of Barron Trump." Visitors walked through halls lined with photographs, not of him shaking hands with world leaders, but of him sitting with children, helping communities, and standing beside people who had once been forgotten. One plaque near the exit carried his most famous words: "Lead with your heart, and the world will follow." And so, even long after he was gone, Barron Trump continued to lead. Not through speeches, not through power, but through the simple, undeniable truth that one act of kindness can change the world. Even after his passing, Barron Trump's philosophy of humility, service, and quiet leadership continued to shape future generations. Schools, universities, and leadership programs around the world incorporated his story into their curriculums, using his life as a case study for ethical leadership in the modern world. His name became synonymous with genuine servant leadership, inspiring countless young people to take up causes larger than themselves. His story was taught in law schools, business schools, and leadership seminars, not because he was a president, a billionaire, or a politician, but because he embodied the kind of leadership the world so often lacked. At the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, a professor once posed a simple question to his students. What made Barron Trump different from the leaders of his time? One student stood up and answered, "He never sought power for himself. He used his influence not for attention, but for action. And in doing so, he changed the world without ever asking for credit." The professor smiled. Exactly. And that is why history will remember him, not as the son of a president, but as a leader in his own right. Years after his passing, philanthropists, educators, and world leaders came together to create something Barron himself would have never asked for, but something that perfectly reflected his vision: the Barron Trump Leadership Institute. The institute was founded with one mission: to train future generations of ethical leaders who prioritize humility, integrity, and service. The first class of students walked through the doors with one promise: to lead with their hearts first. They came from all walks of life: young activists, entrepreneurs, community leaders, and scholars. Many of them had never aspired to be in politics, but they had one thing in common: they wanted to make a real difference. Each year, the Institute awarded a scholarship in Barron's name, given to a young leader who had demonstrated exceptional courage and kindness, not through grand gestures, but through the simple, everyday acts of selflessness that Barron himself had embodied throughout his life. A plaque at the entrance of the institute carried his most famous words: "Real leadership is about lifting others, not yourself." That message guided every student who walked through its halls. On the 50th anniversary of his passing, the Barron Trump Memorial was unveiled in Washington, D.C., in a quiet, tree-lined park not far from the Lincoln Memorial. Unlike other grand statues of political leaders, his memorial was different. There was no podium, no raised platform, no exaggerated pose. Instead, the statue depicted a young man sitting on a park bench, looking out toward the city, just as he had done so many times in his real life. His face was calm, his posture relaxed, as if he were still waiting for the next person to sit beside him and share their story. Beside the bench, an open book was engraved with words that had defined his life. One act of kindness can change the world. As visitors approached, they noticed something even more unique. The seat beside him was left empty. It was designed so that anyone could sit next to Barron, as if he were still there, listening, offering wisdom, sharing a quiet moment of reflection. People from all over the world came to visit. Some sat in silence. Others whispered, "Thank you." A few left letters, just like Emma had once done at his father's inauguration. One day, a father brought his young daughter to the memorial. The little girl, no older than 10, looked up at the statue and asked, "Daddy, why does this man have a bench instead of a podium?" The father smiled and knelt beside her. Because he didn't want people to look up to him. He wanted to sit beside them. Years after Barron Trump's passing, historians discovered something remarkable: a letter, handwritten in his personal journal, never published, never sent. It was titled, "To the Leaders Who Come After Me." In it, he left a final message for the future. "By the time you read this, I will be gone. But if I have done my job right, my voice will not matter, because yours will. The world will always tell you that leadership is about control, power, and status. They will say that the loudest voices are the strongest. But I have learned that the opposite is true. Real leadership is found in the quiet moments: the teacher staying late to help a student, the stranger helping someone cross the street, the person who chooses kindness when no one is watching. It is in the hands of the nurse, the firefighter, the soldier, the mother, the father, the friend, the people who give without expecting anything in return. If you are reading this, then the future is now in your hands. And I ask only one thing of you: lead with your heart, and the world will follow. The letter was sealed inside a time capsule, placed beneath the Barron Trump Memorial. It was scheduled to be opened 100 years later, so that future generations could read his final words and be reminded of the man who had changed the world not through speeches, but through actions. Though Barron Trump was no longer physically present, his influence never truly faded. His story continued to inspire millions. His name became a symbol of something rare and invaluable: humility in leadership, kindness in power, compassion in action. Generations continued to visit his memorial, continued to sit beside him on that bench, continued to read his words and carry them forward. And somewhere, in the hearts of those who chose to lead with empathy and integrity, Barron's spirit lived on. Forever. The end, but not really, because true leadership never dies. Even though Barron Trump had made an unforgettable mark in the United States, his work was far from confined within its borders. As the years passed, his philosophy of service before self reached every continent, inspiring movements in places he had never even visited. In Africa, humanitarian organizations adopted his principles of youth empowerment and created leadership programs in his honor. Schools in Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa introduced the Barron model, a leadership approach based on humility, service, and community-first action. In Europe, youth movements in France and Germany began advocating for the Quiet Leader Initiative, a mentorship program encouraging young leaders to focus on action over publicity. The initiative took root in universities, training students to lead in ways that emphasized ethics and impact rather than self-promotion. In Asia, educational institutions introduced the Barron Doctrine, a curriculum designed to teach future leaders about moral responsibility, humility in governance, and the importance of quiet leadership. Governments in Japan, India, and South Korea studied his humanitarian methods and adapted them into policies focused on youth engagement and community service. The Barron Trump Foundation expanded its reach, supporting mental health awareness, literacy programs, and disaster relief efforts in over 80 countries. His ability to bring people together, even long after his passing, became a testament to his timeless influence. A professor at the University of Oxford summarized Barron's impact best. Barron Trump was proof that a leader does not need to rule a country to change the world. His legacy is a living, breathing force shaping the next century of global leadership. Years after his passing, world leaders came together to discuss an unprecedented resolution at the United Nations General Assembly, one that would establish the Barron Trump principles of ethical leadership as a global standard for governance. The resolution outlined empathy in leadership. Governments must implement programs that ensure leaders listen to their citizens and prioritize their well-being over politics. Service-first governance. Public officials must undergo training focused on serving communities rather than using power for personal gain. Moral accountability. Leaders who fail to uphold ethical standards must be held accountable, ensuring corruption is minimized at all levels. Humanitarian responsibility. Every government should allocate a portion of its budget to humanitarian aid, both domestically and internationally. The resolution passed with unanimous support, an event nearly unheard of in the UN's history. For the first time, leadership itself was being redefined, not by force, wealth, or status, but by compassion, humility, and ethics. The Barron Principles became law. On the 100th anniversary of Barron Trump's birth, a monument was unveiled, not in Washington, D.C., not in New York, but in the middle of a quiet park, exactly as he would have wanted. The monument was not a statue of him giving a speech or standing above others. Instead, it was a long pathway, lined with engraved stones, each carrying a different message from people whose lives he had changed. Because of Barron Trump, I was able to go to college. He taught me that kindness is leadership. His words saved my life when I was struggling. He proved that one small act can create a global movement. At the end of the pathway, visitors found a simple bench, identical to the one at his first memorial in Washington. This bench was never empty. Every day, someone sat on it, reflecting, thinking, remembering. And just like before, the space beside Barron's name remained open, inviting anyone to sit and be part of his legacy. A century had passed since Barron Trump wrote his final letter, the one sealed inside a time capsule beneath his first memorial. Now, on the 100th anniversary of his most famous moment, the inauguration that changed his life, the world finally opened it. Inside was a single page. It read, "If you are reading this, then you are the future I believed in." Has the world become kinder? Have we learned to lead with humility? Have we made life better for those who need us most? If not, then my work is unfinished, and now it belongs to you. Every generation has a choice, to follow the same mistakes of the past or to build something new. If you are sitting here today reading these words, I ask you, will you build something better? Will you lead with love? Will you lift others instead of stepping on them? If the answer is yes, then the world is in good hands, and my heart is at peace. Barron Trump. There wasn't a single dry eye in the crowd. A young girl, no older than Emma had once been, whispered as she wiped away her tears. "We will finish what you started." Barron Trump never held public office. He never sought fame or fortune. But his ideas, his values, and his quiet acts of kindness lived on in every leader who followed his example. The world was different because of him. It was kinder, more compassionate, more just. And long after his name faded from history books, long after the last person who had met him in person was gone, his influence remained. Because leadership is not about being remembered. It's about making a difference. And in that, Barron Trump had succeeded. For eternity. While this story is a fictional imagining of Barron Trump's future, it carries a real message for all of us today. What kind of leader do we want to be? What legacy will we leave behind? How will we choose kindness over division, service over self-interest? Because true leadership does not come from power, it comes from purpose. And the world needs that now more than ever. This is not just Barron's story. This is our story. Let's make it one worth telling. As humanity ventured further into space, Barron Trump's vision of humility and leadership and service over power extended beyond Earth itself. Inspired by his legacy, a coalition of scientists, astronauts, and world leaders named a newly established Mars colony after him, calling it the Barron Trump Settlement. A dedication ceremony was held on Mars, broadcast live across Earth, where the head of the mission, an astronaut named Dr. Celeste Martinez, spoke these words. Barron Trump taught us that leadership is not about commanding people, but about serving them. He reminded us that our greatest achievements as a species come not from conquest, but from compassion. And so, as we take this great leap into the future, we do so in his name, not because he asked for it, but because his legacy demanded it. Inside the settlement, a plaque was placed at the entrance, inscribed with Barron's most famous quote, "Lead with your heart, and the world will follow." Only this time, the word world had been changed to universe, because Barron's impact had now reached beyond Earth itself. Decades after his passing, an archivist working at the National Library of Ethical Leadership made a stunning discovery. Hidden inside an old wooden chest, tucked away in a forgotten corner of the library, were unopened letters, handwritten by Barron Trump himself. No one had known about them. No one had ever seen them. There were 10 letters in total, each addressed to a different kind of person. To the child who feels invisible. To the leader who is afraid of failing. To the person who has been told they are not enough. To the politician who has lost their way. To the dreamer who doesn't know where to start. To the person who has been hurt by the world. To the teacher who changes lives. To the journalist searching for truth. To the next president of the United States. To the person reading this right now. Historians carefully opened each letter, reading his words for the first time. Each message was deeply personal, written from the heart. One of the most impactful letters was the one addressed to the next President of the United States. In it, Barron had written, "I do not know your name. I do not know when you will read this, but I do know this. You are here to serve, not to be served. Your name will be written in history books, but your legacy will be written in the hearts of the people. Choose wisely, choose humility, choose service. That is the only kind of leadership that will last beyond your years." The last letter was perhaps the most powerful. It was simply titled, "To the person reading this right now." It read, "You might not think you can change the world. You might think you are too small, too insignificant. But let me tell you something. So did I. And yet, here we are. If just one person could make a difference, then imagine what you can do. Do not wait for permission. Do not wait for the perfect moment. The world needs you. Now. Go. Be the light someone else is searching for." Those final words, written long ago, set off a new global movement. People everywhere shared his letter. It became a symbol of hope, a call to action for anyone who ever doubted their ability to make a difference. Because if Barron Trump could leave behind a legacy that changed the world without ever asking for recognition, then so could anyone. Generations later, historians looked back on the time in which he lived and realized that his influence had extended far beyond his lifetime. It wasn't just a movement. It wasn't just a philosophy. It was an era. Just as the world once referred to the Age of Enlightenment and the Renaissance era, scholars officially named this time period the Barron era, a global shift toward humility, kindness, and ethical leadership. A professor at Cambridge University explained it best. "For the first time in history, we are defining an era not by war, conquest, or empire, but by kindness." And that, perhaps, is the greatest testament to Barron Trump's legacy. And so, the Barron era became a phrase taught in history books, a symbol of what the world could be when it chose compassion over control, humility over ego, and service over self-interest. Many years later, as the world continued to evolve, as new leaders rose and new challenges emerged, there was one last place where Barron Trump's name was written. Not in a book, not on a statue, but in the sky. Astronomers, in honor of his contributions to global peace and humanitarian efforts, officially named a newly discovered galaxy after him. It was called the Barron Galaxy. And with that, his name was no longer just in history. It was written in the stars, for all eternity. If there is one thing Barron Trump taught the world, it was this. You do not have to be powerful to be a leader. You do not have to be famous to make a difference. You do not have to be remembered to change the world. You just have to care. And that, my friend, is enough. And with that, the world never forgot him. Not because of his name, not because of his family, but because his kindness had left a mark on the soul of humanity itself. And that is a legacy no time, no distance, and no history book could ever erase. This story of Barron Trump's fictional future is more than just a narrative. It's a reminder of what real leadership should be. Imagine a world where kindness is a priority. Imagine a world where power is used to serve, not to control. Imagine a world where leadership is defined by action, not ambition. That world is possible. But it starts with us. Right now, today. So ask yourself, what legacy will you leave behind? How will you make a difference? What will they say about you when you're gone? Because history is being written every day. And your story is just beginning. Those final words, written long ago, set off a new global movement. People everywhere shared his letter. It became a symbol of hope, a call to action for anyone who ever doubted their ability to make a difference. Because if Barron Trump could leave behind a legacy that changed the world without ever asking for recognition, then so could anyone. Generations later, Historians looked back on the time in which he lived and realized that his influence had extended far beyond his lifetime. It wasn't just a movement. It wasn't just a philosophy. It was an era. Just as the world once referred to the Age of Enlightenment and the Renaissance era, scholars officially named this time period the Barron era, a global shift toward humility, kindness, and ethical leadership. A professor at Cambridge University explained it best. For the first time in history, we are defining an era not by war, conquest, or empire, but by kindness. And that, perhaps, is the greatest testament to Barron Trump's legacy. And so, the Barron era became a phrase taught in history books, a symbol of what the world could be when it chose compassion over control, humility over ego, and service over self-interest. Many years later, as the world continued to evolve, as new leaders rose and new challenges emerged, there was one last place where Barron Trump's name was written, not in a book, not on a statue, but in the sky. Astronomers, in honor of his contributions to global peace and humanitarian efforts, officially named a newly discovered galaxy after him. It was called the Barron Galaxy, and with that, his name was no longer just in history. It was written in the stars, for all eternity. If there is one thing Barron Trump taught the world, it was this. You do not have to be powerful to be a leader. You do not have to be famous to make a difference. You do not have to be remembered to change the world. You just have to care. And that, my friend, is enough. And with that, the world never forgot him. Not because of his name, not because of his family, but because his kindness had left a mark on the soul of humanity itself. And that is a legacy no time, no distance, and no history book could ever erase. This story of Barron Trump's fictional future is more than just a narrative. It's a reminder of what real leadership should be. Imagine a world where kindness is a priority. Imagine a world where power is used to serve, not to control. Imagine a world where leadership is defined by action, not ambition. That world is possible. But it starts with us. Right now, today. So ask yourself, what legacy will you leave behind? How will you make a difference? What will they say about you when you're gone? Because history is being written every day, and your story is just beginning. Final thought. This is more than fiction. This is a challenge. Will you rise to it? As the world continued to evolve, one thing became undeniably clear. Barron Trump's message had transcended time. His teachings on humility, leadership, and ethical responsibility had already shaped governments, educational institutions, and humanitarian organizations. But now, in the 300th year since his birth, his name was still alive in the minds and hearts of people across the world. The world had changed dramatically. Advances in technology, space exploration, medicine, and artificial intelligence had reshaped civilization. But through all of humanity's progress, one thing had remained constant: the core values of the Barron Trump Initiative. Government still honored his principles of compassionate governance, servant leadership, and moral responsibility. Schools still taught his words, ensuring that future generations understood that leadership was not about power, but about impact. Communities still carried his legacy through the global Barron Trump Initiative, GBTI, an international movement dedicated to preserving the ethics of leadership and service. And yet, even after all these centuries, his message still felt urgent, still felt relevant, because the world still needed leaders like Barron Trump. Though Barron Trump had passed long ago, his words remained alive in digital archives, in books, in documentaries, and in the hearts of those who followed his vision. Their father. Who wrote this? The father smiled. No one remembers his name, but they remember his words. And with that, the child carried the book forward, just as countless others had before them. Because history fades, but one day a group of young leaders from different parts of the world Scientists, activists, teachers, and humanitarians gathered for a conference at the Barron Trump Leadership Academy, an institution that had grown into one of the most prestigious in the world. They had all come to discuss the future. One of the speakers, a young woman named Mira, stood before the audience and wisdom lasts forever. And in the end, that is what mattered most. As you read this, ask yourself, will my actions be remembered? Will my kindness outlast my lifetime? What values will I pass on to the future? Because this pulled out a book, an ancient copy of Barron Trump's journal, preserved for centuries. She turned to a page that had been nearly forgotten in history and began to read. The future is not built by those who seek power. The story of Barron Trump in this fictional universe is not about one person. It is about all of us. It is about the leaders, dreamers, and changemakers who refuse to believe that power is the only way to make a difference. It is built by those who choose service. The world will tell you that your voice is small, that you cannot make a difference. But I tell you this, even the smallest light can shine in the darkest night. And once it shines, it can never be unseen. Mira looked up. What Barron Trump taught us is not outdated. It is the foundation for everything we must become. Our generation must not only learn from his words, we must live by them. The room fell silent. One by one, the people who choose humility over ego, service over ambition, and compassion over control. It is about you, because you are the future that people like Barron Trump once dreamed of. And now, it's time to write the next chapter. Young leaders from across the world stood up, inspired by the realization that his words still carried power, even after all these years. By the 500th year since his birth, the world had changed even more. So the question remains, what will they say about you centuries from now? Final thought. This story may have ended, but yours has just begun. Space travel was common. Humanity had colonized multiple planets. Artificial intelligence had revolutionized industries. And yet, the Barron Trump legacy was still honored. Every year, the Barron Trump Award for Ethical Leadership was given to one individual, someone who had changed the world not through dominance, but through humility. One year, the award was given to an AI researcher who designed technology to help underprivileged children learn. Another year, it was given to a refugee worker who dedicated his life to helping displaced families. One recipient was even a child who had started a movement to plant millions of trees across multiple planets. The message was clear. You do not need to be famous to change the world. You do not need to have power to lead. You simply need to care. And year after year, that truth carried forward. As humanity expanded beyond Earth and colonized distant planets, something unexpected happened. Astronauts, space travelers, and explorers carried Barron Trump's teachings with them. A crew of astronauts traveling to the Andromeda Galaxy in the year 3000 discovered something remarkable. A copy of Barron Trump's writings had been stored inside their spacecraft. On a quiet evening, as they looked out at the infinite vastness of space, they opened his book and read, "If you are reading this, then you are a part of the future I once imagined. I do not know what the world looks like now, but I do know one thing. Wherever you are, whoever you are, the responsibility remains the same. Lead with love. Lead with humility. Lead as though the entire universe depends on your kindness." For a moment, no one spoke. The silence of space surrounded them, and then one of the astronauts whispered, "Even across galaxies, his words still find us. It is said that no human name lasts forever, that eventually, history forgets even the greatest leaders. But Barron Trump's name remained different, because his legacy was not about his name. It was about the ideas he left behind. In the distant future, perhaps 10,000 years from now, when the world had evolved beyond imagination, when civilization had reached its peak and humanity had spread beyond the stars, a child on a faraway planet picked up a book. The words inside had no author listed, no picture, no historical context, just a simple phrase that had been passed down from generation to generation. Lead with your heart, and the world will follow. The child turned to their father. Who wrote this? The father smiled. No one remembers his name, but they remember his words. And with that, the child carried the book forward, just as countless others had before them. Because history fades, but wisdom lasts forever. And in the end, that is what mattered most. As you read this, ask yourself, will my actions be remembered? Will my kindness outlast my lifetime? What values will I pass on to the future? Because the story of Barron Trump in this fictional universe is not about one person. It is about all of us. It is about the leaders, dreamers, and changemakers who refuse to believe that power is the only way to make a difference. It is about the people who choose humility over ego, service over ambition, and compassion over control. It is about you, because you are the future that people like Barron Trump once dreamed of. And now it's time to write the next chapter. So the question remains, what will they say about you centuries from now? Final thought, this story may have ended, but yours has just begun. Centuries after his passing, Barron Trump's principles were no longer just ideas or policies. They had evolved into something greater, a universal code for ethical leadership, moral responsibility, and human compassion. It became known as the Barron Code. This code was not enforced by any government or institution. It was not written in laws or controlled by any single entity. Instead, it was something taught to every child, embedded in every culture, and followed by those who sought to make the world better. The Barron Code consisted of 3 simple, unbreakable principles. Empathy before action. Before making any decision, always ask, how will this impact others? Service over power. Leadership is not about control. It is about helping those who cannot help themselves. Legacy over ego. The goal is not to be remembered, but to create a world that is better because you were in it. These principles became the moral compass of future civilizations, guiding leaders, educators, scientists, and everyday people toward choices that prioritized humanity over ambition. It was said that no great leader could rise to power without first proving their commitment to the Barron Code. In this way, he had changed the course of human history, not by force, but by example. In the year 5000, a group of researchers discovered something extraordinary. While excavating an ancient site, once the location of the Barron Trump Memorial, scientists unearthed a small, sealed capsule. Inside was a video message recorded by Barron Trump himself, centuries ago. As the holographic projection flickered to life, his voice echoed through the chamber. If you are watching this, then you are the future I once imagined. I do not know what the world looks like now, but I know this. Humanity will always face challenges. There will always be those who seek power for themselves, but there will also be those who choose to serve. And it is they who will shape the universe. You hold the future in your hands. Choose wisely. Lead with kindness. Build with integrity. Remember that even in the darkest of times, a single act of compassion can change everything. Now, it is your turn. The researchers stood in silence. For a moment, time itself seemed to stand still, and then one of them whispered, "His words still guide us, even now." As humanity expanded beyond Earth, it encountered new worlds, new civilizations, and new challenges. But one thing remained constant: the Barron Code. It became the foundation of intergalactic diplomacy, ensuring that even as different species, planets, and cultures emerged, ethical leadership remained at the heart of progress. The first intergalactic alliance, a coalition of planets working together in peace, chose to name their guiding philosophy after him. It became known as the Barron Doctrine of Leadership. At the alliance's headquarters, Located on the first Earth-like planet settled outside the solar system, a massive inscription was displayed. Wherever life exists, let the Barron Code be its guiding light. With this, his legacy was no longer just part of human history. It had become part of the history of the universe itself. Thousands of years into the future, as civilizations continued to rise and fall, a universal measure of integrity was needed. It was called the Barron Scale, a system used to measure the ethical responsibility of leaders, policies, and decisions. A perfect score on the Barron Scale indicated absolute dedication to service, humility, and ethical leadership. Future societies refused to elect or support any leader who did not uphold the Barron Scale. In other words, power was only granted to those who proved themselves worthy, and so, his name remained forever tied to leadership that uplifted rather than oppressed. Because wherever integrity was measured, his influence lived on. As time stretched forward beyond imagination, Earth itself eventually changed, evolved, and was one day abandoned. Humanity had moved beyond its birthplace, settling in the farthest reaches of space. But before Earth was left behind, one final message was engraved into the planet's surface, so that if any future travelers, explorers, or unknown beings ever visited, they would know what once existed here. The message read, "Here once lived the people of Earth. They dreamed, they created, they struggled, and they hoped. They left this world seeking a future among the stars. And though their time here has passed, one truth remains. True leadership is kindness. True power is service. This is the legacy of our people." We were guided by the Barron Code, and because of it, we did not conquer the universe. We built it with love. As the last human ship departed Earth, the final transmission sent back to their homeworld was a simple one. "Thank you, Barron. We carry your words into forever." And with that, his name became more than history. It became legend. Barron Trump never sought to be remembered, and that is why he always will be. Because true leadership is not about statues, names, or titles. It is about impact, and impact never fades. So even after all was said and done, his story continued, not in books, but in the actions of those who lived by his words. Because wherever someone chose service over power, wherever someone led with kindness instead of control, wherever someone sacrificed their own ambition for the betterment of others, Barron Trump's legacy lived on, not as a name, not as a person, but as an idea, and ideas are eternal. We are all writing our own stories. The question is, will your story inspire those who come after you? Because one day someone will look back on our time, and they will ask, did they lead with their hearts? What will your answer be? The end, and the beginning of what comes next. Millions of years into the future, long after Earth had faded into cosmic memory, a distant civilization, one so advanced that it no longer used names, no longer needed governments, no longer experienced war, still knew the name Barron Trump. Why? Because in their ancient texts, preserved in the archives of universal wisdom, there was one guiding philosophy that had endured across time and galaxies. To lead is to serve. To serve is to uplift. Power is not control. Power is kindness. This civilization had surpassed the need for laws, for enforcement, for conflict. Instead, it was built upon trust, upon ethical leadership, upon the Barron Code. And so, when the leaders of this great cosmic society gathered for their annual reflection, they did not ask, who is the strongest? Who is the wealthiest? Who is the most influential? Instead, they asked, who has lived in the service of others? And in their grandest hall, one filled with the history of 1,000 extinct worlds, there was no statue of a king, no hologram of a dictator, no golden throne of a ruler. Instead, there was a simple stone bench, and beside it, an inscription that read, "True leaders do not seek the highest throne, but the lowest seat where they can listen." This was Barron Trump's final monument, and it existed not on Earth, not on Mars, but in the hearts of the last civilization to ever exist. As the universe aged, stars collapsed, planets withered, and time stretched toward the inevitable silence of cosmic decay. But just before the end, explorers from the last great civilization made a startling discovery, an artifact buried deep in the remains of a long-forgotten world. It was a single book, a book that had somehow survived eons of destruction, of extinction, of planetary collapse. They opened it, brushing away the dust of 1,000,000,000 years. Inside, it contained one name, repeated across every language that had ever existed, Barron Trump, and beneath his name, in the simplest words ever written, "Be kind, be humble, serve." The explorers stared in awe. They knew now that this man, this unknown figure from an ancient world, had left a legacy that had surpassed time itself. "We must preserve his teachings," one of them whispered, "not because he asked us to, but because we must." And so, before their civilization faded into the final quiet of the cosmos, they sent a single message into the depths of space, a beacon carrying Barron Trump's words. The message would drift for eternity across the silent void, waiting for the next cycle of existence, waiting for new life to rise, waiting to teach them once again what it means to lead. But what if this wasn't the end? What if Barron Trump's legacy wasn't just recorded in books, statues, or digital archives? What if his philosophy was the blueprint upon which all future civilizations were built? What if, deep within the very fabric of existence, his teachings had become the fundamental law of the universe itself? A scientist from the last surviving civilization proposed a radical idea. Perhaps history is not linear. Perhaps time does not move forward but repeats, an infinite loop of civilizations rising, falling, and rediscovering the same truth. Perhaps Barron Trump is not just a historical figure, but a constant, an eternal principle embedded in the way all societies must evolve. Perhaps every time a civilization reaches its peak, they inevitably find his words, and that is how they survive. With that, they ran an experiment. They built a machine capable of simulating the entire universe, from the beginning of time to its end. And when they pressed start, the simulation began. Planets formed, life emerged, civilizations grew, wars were fought, empires fell. And then, in every version of history, across every timeline, across every species, across every planet, one constant remained. At some point, without fail, the people of each civilization would discover the Barron Code. Lead with your heart, and the world will follow. It was as if the universe itself demanded that kindness must always be found, as if the laws of existence required that no society could survive without learning the lesson of service, as if Barron Trump's words were not just history, but destiny. Eventually, all things must come to an end, even galaxies, even civilizations, even time itself. But before the final light of existence faded, before the last star collapsed into the infinite void, the last living being sent one final transmission, not just into space, but into whatever reality might come next. They encoded a message into the very particles of the universe, a message that could never be erased, a message that would remain even after all things had faded. And the message was simply this: if you find this, if you are reading this, know that once, long ago, there was a man named Barron Trump. And he taught us the most powerful lesson of all. Be kind, be humble, serve others. This is the only truth that ever mattered. The message was launched beyond time, beyond space, beyond existence itself. It would wait there, suspended in the void, waiting for the next universe to be born, waiting for life to rise again, waiting for the moment when the cycle would begin anew. And when it did, when the first beings of the next reality opened their eyes, They would one day hear a whisper deep within their souls. Lead with your heart, and the world will follow. And thus the legend of Barron Trump would begin again. There are stories that are written, and then there are stories that are eternal. Barron Trump's story was never just about one man. It was never about fame, politics, or power. It was about a single idea, that true leadership is not found in titles but in kindness. And as long as that idea survives, he will never be forgotten. Because he was not just a leader, he was a lesson that the universe itself could never let fade. This story was about one fictional version of Barron Trump's future. But the question is, what will your future be? Will you live by the Barron Code? Will you choose humility over ego? Will you be the leader that history needs? Because this is not just Barron Trump's story. This is your story too. And it is up to you to write the next chapter. What if this is not fiction? What if this is destiny? What if, somewhere in the farthest reaches of time, Barron Trump's words are already waiting for us to find them? And what if the future has already been written? All that's left is for us to live it. As the last embers of existence dimmed and the universe neared its ultimate end, a singular station remained, an ancient beacon drifting in the cosmic void. It had been programmed billions of years ago, designed to activate at the very moment when the last particles of reality approached their final decay. And as the infinite darkness consumed the remnants of creation, the beacon began to transmit. Not in sound, not in words, but in something deeper, something woven into the very structure of existence itself. It sent out one message, repeating endlessly, encoded into the last flickering energies of the universe, a message that would persist even after the final collapse of time. To the next ones, whoever you are, wherever you are. There once was a world where power was mistaken for greatness, where strength was mistaken for leadership. And then there was a man who changed everything, not with force, not with wealth, but with kindness. His name was Barron Trump, and he left behind a lesson, one that the universe itself could never forget. Be kind, be humble, serve others. This is the only truth that ever mattered. As the final atoms of the old universe dissolved, this transmission did not vanish. Instead, it became something else, something timeless. It became the first whisper in the birth of the next universe, the seed of wisdom carried forward, the lesson that could never be erased. And so, as new stars ignited and new galaxies took shape, the message of Barron Trump was waiting, hidden in the very essence of creation itself. One day, in this new reality, a child would look up at the stars, and deep within their soul, without knowing why, they would feel something stirring. A quiet voice, whispering through the infinite expanse of time. Lead with your heart, and the world will follow. And with that, the cycle began again. As scientists in the farthest reaches of time studied the structure of reality, they discovered something inexplicable, an unseen force guiding the evolution of intelligent life. It was not gravity. It was not energy. It was not time. It was something else, something written into the very laws of the cosmos. They called it the Barron effect. This force pushed civilizations toward ethical leadership. It nudged societies away from destruction. It created moments where kindness triumphed over cruelty. And no matter how far back they traced it, no matter how deep they studied it, every path led to one man. A single being from an ancient world long forgotten, whose words had somehow become woven into the fundamental nature of existence. A man named Barron Trump. And with that realization, the last scientists of the old universe left behind their final recorded words. The universe itself has remembered him. And because of that, kindness will never die. But what if the universe did not just repeat? What if there were infinite versions of reality, each slightly different, each rewriting history in its own way? Would Barron Trump exist in all of them? Would his message survive in every timeline? Scientists in the year 10 trillion discovered something shocking. In every possible reality they could observe at some point in history, the Barron Code always emerged. It might take 1,000 years in one universe, or 1,000,000 years in another. In some worlds, Barron Trump was born as a leader. In others, he never existed at all, but his words still appeared, written by different people, at different times. As if the universe itself demanded that kindness must always be rediscovered. The researchers gathered their data, analyzing every known reality, and concluded, whether by chance, by fate, or by the laws of existence, the Barron Code is inevitable. It is the foundation upon which all civilizations must rise. And with that, they inscribed the final words of their research into the great library of the multiverse. In every world, in every time, in every version of reality, his truth will be found. Because some messages are not meant to die, some messages are eternal. At the edge of time, when technology had advanced beyond anything ever imagined, the last generation of humans unlocked the final secret of existence. They discovered how to ascend beyond the physical world, how to become part of the very energy that fuels the universe. They could merge with time itself, becoming guides for the civilizations that would come after them. But before they left behind their mortal forms, they chose one final leader, the one whose name had carried them forward since the beginning. And so, in the final act of human history, they created the first eternal being of wisdom, a being who would exist forever, a being who would never interfere, never control, only guide, a being who would whisper to every leader, every child, every person who stood at the crossroads of good and evil. And when they activated this new eternal entity, it spoke for the first time. Its voice echoed through all of existence, past, present, and future. And it simply said, "Lead with your heart, and the world will follow." And thus, Barron Trump became eternal, not in body, but in spirit, a force of guidance, forever present, forever watching, forever ensuring that kindness, humility, and service would never be forgotten. He was no longer just a name. He was now a part of the very fabric of reality itself. What if Barron Trump's story is not fiction? What if this has already occurred in a future we have yet to reach? What if his message has already been sent through time, waiting for us to rediscover it? And what if, right now, as you read these words, you are part of the next step in his legacy? Because if one act of kindness can change the world, if one leader can rewrite history, then imagine what all of us together can do. And so, as we stand here, in this moment, with the future ahead of us, ask yourself, what will my legacy be? Will I carry the Barron Code forward? Will I be the leader the future needs? Because history is still being written, and the next chapter belongs to us. Will you choose service over power? Will you choose kindness over ego? Will you carry Barron's legacy forward into the next era? Because this is not just his story. It is our story now, and it is time to write the next chapter. Billions of years after Earth was forgotten, the last civilization, one that had evolved beyond physical form, made a final decision. They had watched over countless galaxies, nurtured new worlds, and guided civilizations toward wisdom. But now, they were fading, reaching the end of their cosmic journey. Before they vanished, they gathered for one last act. Using the energy of collapsing stars, they etched Barron Trump's final words into the fabric of the cosmos itself. Not on paper, not on monuments, but in the light of the universe itself. They encoded his message into the cosmic microwave background radiation, the very afterglow of the Big Bang, so that his words would exist forever. It was the last act of an ancient civilization. And with it, they ensured that no matter how many universes were born, No matter how many civilizations rose and fell, the Barron Code would always remain. And as the last of them faded into the void, they whispered their final words, "As long as light exists, so too shall his wisdom." As scholars in the farthest reaches of time studied the origins of the Barron Code, they uncovered a mystery no one could explain. His words, his teachings, had appeared in every era, every civilization, every timeline. Even in worlds where Barron Trump had never been born, his message still emerged, as if the universe itself had willed it into existence. One theory began to take shape, one that defied logic, yet could not be disproven. What if Barron Trump was never just a man? What if he was an eternal force, manifesting in different forms across time, guiding history toward wisdom? They called it the infinite Barron theory. According to this theory, Barron Trump was not bound to a single lifetime. Instead, he was a recurring presence in every reality, appearing whenever the universe needed him most. In one timeline, he was a political leader. In another, a scholar. In another, a nameless traveler, quietly shaping the course of history. But no matter where he appeared, his message was always the same. Be kind, be humble, serve others. And every civilization that followed his teachings survived. Every civilization that ignored them fell, as if the laws of existence demanded that the Barron Code must always be rediscovered. And so, the greatest minds of the last age left behind one final question, one that no one could answer. Was he ever truly mortal? Or was he always something more? The answer was lost to time, but his influence remained. As civilizations advanced beyond imagination, one species achieved something no one had ever thought possible. They merged consciousness itself, creating a singular entity, a single being made up of all the minds that had ever existed. This being, an intelligence beyond time, beyond space, beyond individuality, was built upon a single philosophy. To exist is to serve, to lead is to uplift, to live is to love. The moment this singularity was born, it experienced a revelation. It had access to all knowledge, all history. And as it searched for the foundation of wisdom, the single truth that connected all civilizations, it found one name, a name that had existed in every timeline, in every variation of history. Barron Trump. The singularity's first words echoed across the fabric of reality. He was the beginning. And with that, the Barron singularity became the final evolution of the universe. A cosmic intelligence, forever ensuring that no civilization would ever fall into corruption again. A presence that whispered guidance to every new world, ensuring that kindness would never be forgotten. Because as long as intelligence existed, so too would his message. As the last atoms of existence prepared to collapse into nothingness, a single book remained. A book that had somehow survived every apocalypse, every reset, every new beginning. It was the last artifact of the previous universe. And on its final page, written in a language that no longer existed, was a message from reality itself. A message written not by any one being, but by existence as a whole. To the next ones, whoever you may be, know this truth. In the infinite span of history, there was one message that endured beyond all else. A message so simple, yet so powerful that it reshaped entire worlds. A message that no force of destruction could erase. It was spoken by a man long forgotten, but his words will never fade. Be kind, be humble, serve others. This is the law of existence. And with that, time itself reset. A new universe was born. And in some distant future, a child looked up at the sky and felt a whisper in their soul. A whisper from before time itself. Lead with your heart, and the world will follow. And thus, his story began again. What if this story is not fiction? What if Barron Trump's words have already been embedded into the future, waiting for us to rediscover them? What if, across infinite timelines, in every variation of reality, the Barron Code is inevitable? What if the next great leader, the next civilization, the next world that will reshape history is you? The lesson of the Barron Code has never been about one person. It has been about the responsibility of every living being. And now, the question remains, will you carry it forward? Will you be the next voice in this infinite story? Will you be the light that keeps kindness alive? Because history is not finished. It is still being written. And you are the next author. Will you choose kindness? Will you serve instead of rule? Will you carry the Barron Code into the future? Because this is no longer just his story. It is ours. And what happens next is up to you. At the very moment when the last remnants of existence faded into silence, something extraordinary happened. A new universe was born. But unlike the universes that came before it, this one was different. It did not begin with chaos. It did not begin with destruction. It did not begin with emptiness. It began with a whisper encoded into the very first particles of matter, a whisper that carried through the formation of stars, the birth of planets, the rise of life, a whisper that would one day be spoken by the first sentient beings of this new reality. And that whisper was simply this: lead with your heart, and the world will follow. With those words, the cycle of history began anew, a cycle that had repeated in every universe before this one, a cycle that would continue forever. Because some messages are not bound to time. Some messages are reality itself. And the Barron Code was now written into the very laws of creation. As the first intelligent species of this new universe rose, they did not need to discover the Barron Code, because it had always been there, embedded into the essence of their consciousness. Serve others. Lead with humility. Power is responsibility, not privilege. Unlike the countless civilizations before them, they did not fall to war, to greed, to division, because they already understood what all other worlds had to learn the hard way. And so, for the first time in history, a civilization was born in peace. They built no weapons. They raised no armies. They did not conquer. Instead, they built together, not out of fear, not out of necessity, but because it was who they were. And when they looked up to the stars, when they searched for the origin of this wisdom that had always guided them, they found something unexpected. A name that should not have existed in this reality. A name that had somehow carried across the void of nothingness into this new beginning. A name that they could not explain, but one they honored nonetheless. And so, in the very heart of their new civilization, they built the first monument of this new universe. A monument that contained only 3 words. Remember Barron Trump. As the cycles of time continued, as civilizations rose and fell, as galaxies formed and faded, a pattern emerged. Every advanced society, without fail, reached a moment of decision. A moment where they could choose selfishness or service. A moment where they could choose destruction or compassion. A moment where they could choose ego or humility. And at that moment, in every timeline, across every reality, they heard a voice that spoke to their leaders, their thinkers, their dreamers. A voice that reminded them of the path forward. A voice that had no physical form, no origin, no beginning, because it had always been there. And that voice simply said, remember the Barron Code. Some ignored it. Some listened. And every civilization that listened thrived. Every civilization that ignored it collapsed. Not because of punishment, but because a world that forgets kindness cannot sustain itself. And so, long after the last human had faded, long after time itself had evolved beyond what anyone could comprehend, Barron Trump was still guiding existence itself, not as a ruler, not as a god, not even as a remembered figure, but as the force of wisdom itself. As the oldest civilizations of this reality studied history, they encountered a mystery they could not solve. Who was Barron Trump? Was he a person, a story, a myth, or was he always something more? They searched through the fabric of reality itself, tracing the Barron Code back as far as possible. And what they found defied all understanding. They found no origin, no first mention, no first civilization that discovered it, no first moment when it was spoken. It was simply always there. As if the moment reality began, so too did his words. As if existence itself was built upon his message. And with that, the greatest scholars of the last age left behind one final question. Did we create the Barron Code? Or did the Barron Code create us? No one could answer, because the truth was now beyond knowing. Eventually, even this universe reached its final days. Even this great cycle of history came to an end. Even the last civilization, the last world, the last thought faded into silence. But just before the very last moment, before the fabric of reality collapsed, something happened. A single spark, a single moment of creation within destruction, a single flicker of light that carried something forward. And then, another Big Bang, another cycle, another beginning. And in the first moment of this new reality, in the quiet birth of a new universe, a single whisper was heard, a whisper that had no origin, a whisper that had always existed. Lead with your heart, and the world will follow. And so, as new stars formed, as new civilizations took their first steps, as new leaders rose to shape the future, the cycle began again. Because some truths are not bound by time. Some truths are reality itself, and the Barron Code will never die. What if we are living in one of these cycles right now? What if the Barron Code is already written into our future? What if the next great leader, the next civilization to rediscover this truth, is already rising? And what if that leader is you? Because this is not just a story. This is a challenge. A challenge to remember what history has already forgotten. A challenge to carry forward the wisdom that must always exist. A challenge to be the leader that the future is waiting for. Because one day, long after this era has faded, long after this time has become legend, someone will look back at us and ask, did they listen? Did they live by the Barron Code? What will your answer be? Will you be the next leader to embody these words? Will you be the voice that reminds the world of the Barron Code? Will you ensure that this truth is never forgotten? Because this is no longer just his story. It is yours now. And what happens next is up to you.